A lot of people told me that Silent Hill 4 was the scariest entry in the series, and after playing it, wow, I don't see that.
Hey bro, watch your jet. Watch your jet, bro. Watch your jet!
This game is somewhat frustrating and just downright goofy at times. Now, I'm not saying Silent Hill 4 is a bad game, because trust me, it's not. Far from it, actually. The story is fairly good, and there's a few standout moments that really shine. But it's the gameplay, level design, and just overall loop that's pretty frustrating to play. And I hate to say it, but boring at times.
Oh man, that was awesome.
Just like my Silent Hill 3 video, I want to crawl into the skin of Henry Townsend and shed some light on the good, bad, and ugly of Silent Hill 4, along with unique cam footage outside the apartment thanks to a brand new tool, and thread the hidden narratives and meanings behind everything happening in South Ashfield and beyond. Silent Hill 4 opens with a block of text explaining our current predicament. Unlike previous Silent Hill protagonists, we learn we've had a fairly normal life, living in a fairly ordinary apartment. We're happy, life is good, and only recently, we've started to develop a strange recurring dream each night. Oh, and by the way, we can't leave our apartment. A quick look around shows that this apartment isn't exactly normal, with every square inch of the room being glazed in blood and rust. Now, it might just be me, but it seems like Silent Hill 4's art direction is slightly different from 1 and 3, opting for a more muted and washed color palette like SH2. The blood and rust here isn't as vibrant, visceral, and in your face as the previous entry was, but it still gets the message across that something is terribly, if not horribly, wrong with this place, creating an atmosphere of uneasiness that permeates every corner. Which, speaking of corners, if you decide to rear your head around this specific one, you're delighted with this sound. Well, I can't say that sound choice is making me quiver in a puddle of piss. If anything, that almost made me laugh. What's supposed to be scary is just oddly comedic. Like, it kinda just took me out of the moment for a second. We'll talk more about this later, but the sound design in this game ranges from Dead Space levels of peak sound design to straight up some of the most generic default stock sound effects you've ever heard. But regardless, someone just screamed in our apartment where we supposedly live alone. So just like every good horror protagonist, we fuck around and find out. The outside of our bedroom doesn't paint a prettier picture, as the walls are still oozing blood and rust, and trying to escape through any door or window is futile. They're barred shut with an oddly sticky, fleshy sound when interacting. On top of this, there's TV static blaring through the apartment, and I promise you, this isn't pareidolia, there really is a face seared into the wall. With seemingly no other option, we try to leave through the front door, but that's when things take a horrific turn. In a matter of seconds, the wall starts giving birth to a rotten corpse that's tweaking like crazy. And without anything to defend ourselves and being locked inside, well, it doesn't take a genius to realize how this is going to end.
Wake up. Henry, wake up.
Waking back up, we quickly realized that everything that just happened was thankfully an awful dream.
Oh man, what a dream.
Which making this the third and final game within the quadrilogy to start off in a dream sequence. It's kind of funny that despite Silent Hill 2 starting the game by saying,
"In my restless dreams, I see that town.
It's the only game to not begin within a dream. But enough about dreams, we're finally back to reality, and as we can see, the apartment is, for the most part, normal. But trying to look around causes Henry to have the masculine urge to dial his phone. Reading his finger strokes, it seems like he tried to dial 555-2495, but the call ends up failing. However, as we begin to walk away, our broken phone suddenly springs to life.
This is a collect call from
the Marcus cousin.
Hello?
Guess who's going to jail tonight?
What?
Okay, that's not actually the call that happens. I don't know what the hell that was about, but Henry hears a woman's voice call out for him.
Help me.
But this doesn't make any sense as the cord has been cut.
The cord's cut.
This is something Silent Hill as a series just loves to do. It happened in SH1 when Harry gets a call from Cheryl.
Where are you?
Cheryl! SH3 when Heather gets harassed by the birthday man.
Happy birthday to you.
And now in SH4 as Henry is receiving messages from an unknown individual. It's a common trope, but one that's effective. But again, it's a Silent Hill game, so despite the cord being cut, we can still dial certain numbers to varying results. Like, this is what happens if you dial a billboard that can be seen outside of Henry's window. After fooling with the magical telephone, we finally have full autonomy over Henry. From this point forward, you're free to explore the apartment as you see fit, which if you played the previous Silent Hill entries, you should notice something is really different about the gameplay so far. And that's because Silent Hill 4 begins in the first-person perspective, which is a pretty big deal. Never before had a Silent Hill game utilize a true first-person perspective. It's always been synonymous with a third-person point of view mixed with tank controls. Now, whether you view this as a good or bad choice will depend on your own personal preferences when it comes to horror. But me personally, I gotta say this edition was not only experimental, but probably could have been implemented better. See, whoever programmed the first-person controls on PS2 made a pretty questionable decision. And that's because in most games, movement is tied to the left analog stick while direction is guided by the right. But Silent Hill 4's quirky ass decided to combine both movement and direction into one analog stick, meaning every time you move left, you also turn left, regardless if you wanted to or not, resulting in what I can only describe as a delicious amount of jank. I'd imagine they did this because it's reminiscent of the tank controls from prior entries, which at this point in the series, 4 games in, most players would have been used to. Wait, what? They removed the tank controls from third person? What's the point of having it in first person then? This is fine when you're in the third person, but doing this fuckery in the first person creates a jarring experience where it feels like the controls are actively fighting against you with each and every step. It's for that exact reason I highly recommend you go to the settings and change the first person movement from rotational movement to sideways movement, which I'm telling you creates an infinitely smoother experience. But first person analysis aside, the apartment offers quite a bit of flavor text for players that want to inspect every nook and cranny. The bedroom alone tells us that Henry has had prior experiences with the town of Silent Hill, and he seems to have a decent skill set with cameras as all the photos in his room were personally taken by him. And that's one of the neat things about this game. You could really sit here and psychoanalyze every detail, piecing together bits of information that shed light on the type of person Henry is. Which you'll probably want to because this man has the personality of a sad sack of bricks watching paint dry.
What a dream.
I know a part of this was intentional to allow players to see themselves in the shoes of Henry, but damn, like, you would think this guy would have a bigger reaction to the things happening around him.
Oh man. The cord's cut. What's going on here? What the hell?
But if we want to escape the apartment, we should probably head into the living room. Just like the bedroom, our living room is back to normal. However, there's one tiny issue with this apartment. Because just like our dream sequence, we still can't open the windows, and looking at the front door, this happens. So yeah, despite the dream being over, our very real nightmare is only getting started. The front door is chained shut with approximately 4 locks, being the only thing stopping us from experiencing the sweet and savory taste of freedom. And if you really think about it, this door is extremely sinister, because the only way to lock a door like this would have to be from the inside. And applying the rule of Occam's razor, we can deduce that someone named Walter is behind this, given that there's a big red note that says, "Don't go out," signed by him. Meaning that Walter, or whoever did this, unless they can just straight up defy physics, is likely still in the apartment, But just don't think about that, okay? Another supernatural element to the apartment is that despite living next to neighbors, no one can hear you scream. You can yell as loud as you want, beat on all the windows, and even watch your neighbors pass by through the peephole. But it doesn't matter because no one can see you struggling. This is made even more apparent when you look out the peephole and notice 15 bloody handprints. Your neighbor, in this case Eileen, is completely oblivious to it, and there's no explanation. With all of this combined, it feels as if Henry's home has been sucked into a pocket dimension. Which, if you're a big fan of cosmic horror, this is probably really terrifying. To be so close to help, yet so far away. It's an unnerving feeling. But you know what's more unnerving? The fact you haven't hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to beat fellow YouTuber Bean Buddy on a goal to 200k subscribers, so let's make that happen, okay?
Good luck, buddy. Not with that upload schedule.
How the fuck did he get in here? Anyways, so our main objective is pretty straightforward. We gotta escape. However, there isn't anywhere we can go. The windows are sealed shut, our bathroom was empty, and our laundry room doesn't have anything useful. But things change when you finally interact with the storage box out in the living room. That loud boom definitely came from the bathroom, and upon investigating, we discover something otherworldly. Our bathroom is in complete disarray, as a large hole has burrowed its way into our wall. But this is, in a strange twist of fate, great news, as we finally have the ability to leave the apartment.
Somebody in there? I wonder if I can get out this way.
But the bad news is that I don't trust this hole. Placing your ear next to it, you'll hear a ghastly ambiance mixed with the giggles of a child and other sounds. Now, interacting with the hole, you'll notice a sewage pipe blocking your way, and upon removing it, you'll receive a classic staple of these games, and that's the steel pipe, baby. 4 games in? Yeah, this has just become the go-to weapon loadout for each Silent Hill protagonist, and I'm glad to see this lovable weapon here in Silent Hill 4. With our sturdy new weapon in tow, we're now ready to pipe down any monster that comes our way, and with that said, we force ourselves to squeeze through the ominous hole. Within, it's way longer than you would expect, with a clinically bright white light at the end of the tunnel. Surprisingly, this entire section of crawling is done by the player. The game makes you manually move the joystick all the way to the end, and trying to go backwards is impossible, creating a feeling that you're too deep now. You're forced to face whatever awaits you. And on the other end is an escalator. I can't help but find it funny that Henry is so nonchalant about everything. Any normal person would be standing here completely bamboozled if not freaking out, but not our boy Henry. Bro is squatted down, riding the damn escalator like it's a kiddie ride at Disney. My man is so unbothered.
What the hell?
At the end of the escalator, you'll notice another shift in gameplay. We're finally in the third person after so much of our time was spent in first person. This entry will flop back and forth between the two perspectives, with anything involving room 302 taking place in first person, whereas anywhere you go through the mysterious holes will take place in third person. As I've said before, it's an experimental design choice where you're either gonna love it or hate it, because the entire game structure is dependent on that gameplay loop. But taking a closer look at our newfound area, we can see it's a very industrial design with large rusty pipes lining the walls. And if you look closely, you can see a clumpy buildup of mass distorting said walls. But its presence isn't surprising, given that further down the hall, we can make out a directional sign that says South Ashfield, which is a dead giveaway that we're in a subway station, something that's notoriously filthy. Now, how we went from a bathroom hole in the wall to a whole-ass subway station is beyond me. However, looking past this sign, we can make out another human. It looks to be a fairly tan woman, and upon approaching, she seems eager to learn more about us.
Who are you?
Henry. And you?
This is my dream, and you don't even know my name. It's Cynthia.
In her mind, this is all just one weird dream, which I don't blame her. The setup is all kinds of wacky.
So you think this is a dream, huh?
Well, if it's not a dream, what is it?
Huh?
Anyway, I want to get out of here, but I can't find the exit. Say, will you help me find it? I'm kinda scared all alone. I'll do a special favor for you later.
But we don't have time for that. We gotta lock in. Now, what's cool about this interaction is that this is not the first time we've seen or heard Cynthia. Remember when we first woke up, our telephone rang with someone asking for help?
Help me.
What?
Yeah, that voice was actually Cynthia. And if you looked out of the window of the apartment, you could actually see an extremely low poly model of her walking into this very subway. Which, fun fact, you'd never see this normally, but if you use a camera hack, you can actually see that Cynthia just crumbles into a ball after walking down. Maybe a little foreshadowing for what's to come. But back to the subway. Cynthia is now by our side, but this has to be the world's fastest escort mission. Because, bruh, all we do is hook a corner, head down a hallway, before Cynthia's insides just straight up implode.
Wait a minute. I think I'm gonna puke.
I love the small detail of Henry instinctively wanting to help her, but again, we don't know Cynthia like that. Henry just can't follow her into the bathroom despite knowing something is clearly wrong, so that leaves us at a standstill. And after waiting for an undisclosed amount of time, suddenly the men's bathroom opens up, which is odd because Cynthia went inside the women's. And before you know it, a whole ass dog gets yeeted out of the bathroom. I love that the other two dogs just fucking phase into existence, but yeah, this is the first enemy type you'll encounter in Silent Hill 4, and these guys are called the Sniffer Dogs. While not the most original name, they're still a pain in the ass, much like the canine enemies from prior entries. They have this disgusting, rotted, patchy fur that exposes the multiple lesions and sores dotted all around their bodies. And the standout feature of this enemy is the zesty ass tongue they use to siphon the fluids of their enemies. These guys are on a level of freaky that I can never match, but thankfully you don't have to fight them here. They're too busy cannibalizing one of their own that you can easily slither by. However, if you decide to throw hands with these freaky mutts, you'll notice a brand new combat mechanic introduced in SH4, and that's the ability to charge up heavy attacks for massive damage. On top of the massive damage, you also have iframes while doing it, and in some cases, timing it right can stunlock even the toughest of enemies. Overall, I like its addition. It allowed the developers to innovate on Silent Hill's combat without it being too over the top for a survival horror game. However, with that said, just like the prior entries, combat still isn't that satisfying. And really, I'm torn if it should be. If it feels too satisfying, then it feels less like a horror game and more like an action one. But if it feels too shitty, then you just end up with a frustrating experience that's fun for no one. But if I had to guess what perfect combat would look like in these games, I'd imagine it's intense, risky, and preferably a last resort. If I was forced to pick a game, I think SH3 was the closest to that kind of experience. With killer dogs now on the loose, I'd say we have a pretty good reason to check in on Cynthia, but upon entering the ladies' restroom, she's nowhere to be found. However, in her absence, there is a giant hole in the wall with an outer red design that looks a lot like the seal of Metatron. If you follow it expecting to find Cynthia, good luck, buddy. Instead, you'll find yourself back in the apartment.
What? Another dream. Was I really inside that woman's dream? Oh, that's just stupid. What am I thinking?
So look, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I'm some Silent Hill 4 lore master, but I do have a theory as to why traveling through the holes in the wall causes us to wake back up in our bedroom, although I think we should talk more about that after we find Cynthia. But this right here is the gameplay loop I was referring to at the beginning. Anytime you see one of those giant red holes, that's a gateway back to your apartment, and going through them has some interesting benefits. For one, room 302 is the only way you can heal in the first half of the game. Any and all damage you sustain in the other world can be washed away if you sit in here long enough. Additionally, new interactions, unlockables, and notes that piece the story together are drip fed to the player over the course of the game here. So, if you want the full SH4 experience, I highly recommend that you come back to this apartment frequently. For example, this time around, you'll notice the living room is slightly different as the corner cabinet has been moved, and it clearly wasn't us given that we've been traversing the subway with Cynthia. But behind the furniture, we discover a whole-ass gun. As a hot-blooded American myself, I too find random pistols about as I do my spring cleaning. But what I find far more interesting is the ominous black hole on the wall. According to a note next to it, this hole was made by the previous inhabitant of the room, which tells us we're not the first victim to experience all of this paranormal activity. And upon looking through the black hole, we can see it's a voyeuristic peephole that leads straight into someone's bedroom. And this someone is Eileen, our next door neighbor who we saw through the front door earlier.
Where did I put that damn broom? Oh, there it is.
The inclusion of this people is not just a game mechanic, but an evocative piece of storytelling that plays on our sense of morality and discomfort. The act of watching someone without consent, especially in their bedroom of all places, crosses ethical boundaries that we as players instinctively recognize as morally wrong. The game places the player in a situation where this people becomes one of the only links Henry has to another human being. In a twisted way, this fragile tether to normalcy provides an odd sense of comfort, despite us knowing damn well we're doing something we shouldn't be. I can't help but find it genius that the game creates a scenario where the player almost feels compelled to look through the hole. Hopefully not out of lewd curiosity or malice, but out of a desperate need for connection and information. I gotta say, you know the game is really working its charm if over time you start to develop this protective instinct towards Eileen, which is a testament to the game's ability to manipulate the player's emotion and moral compass. The game cleverly inverts the initial creepiness of the act, turning it into a psychological experience that deepens your bond with Eileen, even though you're never truly interacting with her directly. At least that's what I think, but maybe I'm reading into this shit too deeply. Regardless, Eileen is just chilling on the bed before she takes a broom and leaves the room. In her absence, we can spot a familiar face on the bed. That's our boy Robbie the Rabbit, the Silent Hill amusement park mascot that was introduced in SH3. But as we pull away from the people, our broken telephone rings out. Again, it's Cynthia, and she's wondering where we went.
Where did you go? Hurry! Save me! If you need a token, there's one here!
However, you can just tell she's far more panicked than last time, so that's a little concerning. Upon hanging up the phone, we can also hear a really odd scraping sound echoing throughout the apartment. It's a little creepy at first, but you'll quickly realize it's coming from the front door, and looking at the peephole, we see it's Eileen sweeping with a broom. It's a very subtle and kind of forgettable interaction in the grand scheme of things, but it makes the apartment feel cohesive. Because earlier we saw her take the broom from the peephole, and now she's sweeping outside the front door. Again, I know it's such a small thing, but I'm a dirty little slut for details like this. I love when video games show you something and then there's a payoff, no matter how big or small it may be. But alright, enough about sweeping. We gotta figure out what happened to Cynthia. So taking yet another plunge through the bathroom hole, we find ourselves back in the women's restroom. However, there's something peculiar. A bloody statue has appeared in one of the stalls that looks almost identical to Cynthia. Interacting with it, we receive the Lynch Street line coin. How this mannequin statue of Cynthia came to be is never explained to my knowledge, but I feel as though it's some not so subtle foreshadowing for what's to come. With the coins in hand, we can make our way deeper into the subway by using them on the local turnstiles. And it's at this very moment in the game you will encounter one of the most controversial and potentially frustrating things about this entry. And that's because there's a brand new, never before seen enemy type known as Ghost. We were able to capture a glimpse of this in the opening sequence, but this is our first time actually fighting one. Although fighting is a generous term because you can't actually kill the ghost. They sloppily fly around the arena, dealing damage to you just by getting near them, and no matter how many times you beat them down, they will just get back up.
Is that dick good? Yes, kid.
Again, these enemies have an extremely polarizing reputation, where I know some of you watching probably fucking love them, while the other half would gladly burn their source code at the stake. Personally, I don't find them scary, just really annoying. They're too damn goofy for me to feel any fear. But my biggest gripe is that they rob the player of one of the best things about Silent Hill, and that's being able to absorb and experience the atmosphere. In the previous entries, it kind of felt rewarding to kill all the enemies, because then you're really able to sit there and analyze every little detail that makes the levels beautiful in its own dark way. But you don't get that experience in this game. It's a fucking mad dash to the next area with very little time to process or enjoy what's going on around you. And maybe that's intentional, but it's not my cup of tea. It's not like one of those enemies that just shows up and shits away. No, this is the enemy of the game. Get used to them because there's a lot more of these fuckers on the way. Past these bitch-ass ghosts, we find that Cynthia got herself stuck inside one of the subway cars.
Hurry, help me!
So heading down to the very end of the platform, we can find a door that leads to the conductor's cabin. Within, there's a big red button that unlocks all the car doors. This allows Cynthia to rejoin us in our party, but again, it's short-lived, because all we do is make our way through a mini maze within the cars, before entering a door, realizing that Cynthia did not follow us for some fuck-ass reason, bro.
Cynthia?
I swear Cynthia would be putting up Olympic gold medals if there was a category for doing dumb shit. So we head down the maintenance ladder, which brings us to an area that's very much OG Silent Hill. The blood and rust looks like we're inside something living, which is made even more apparent when you listen closely and hear what sounds like a heartbeat. But that's quickly interrupted as ghosts can be heard trafficking our position. Again, there's no point in fighting them, so we venture deeper into the subway, only to be met with something far worse. At the heart of the subway, we can find a giant worm-like creature that resembles a meaty schlong or umbilical cord, along with even more sniffer dogs. The camera angle here makes you feel extremely small amongst the towering terrors, and combined with the fact that we just passed through a fleshy area that felt like the inside of a throat, this section makes you really feel like you've been swallowed whole by an otherworldly entity. It's also within this section we finally hear back from Cynthia, but it seems like she's not alone.
Henry, I found the exit. Come to the turnstile. Henry, I found the exit. Come to the turnstile. Hurry! Hurry! It's him. He's coming!
An unknown man has also found her position, and given that abrupt cutoff, I'd imagine he doesn't have the purest of intentions. So we make a mad dash towards her, but in our way are these damn escalators that have a new enemy simply called the Wall Man. These humanoid fleshy enemies live inside the walls and only pop out when Henry's in their proximity. If you time it right, they're not too bad to dodge, but should you fail to do so, they'll ragdoll your ass so fast, man. These guys have abnormally large hitboxes that seem to catch Henry at even the slightest glance. And while this section can definitely be annoying, I can't help but find it hilarious anytime I get hit. But at the end of it all, we find the markings of a rather gruesome scene. On the floor is a purse, a wide range of makeup products, and lots of blood scattered about. We can infer these belong to Cynthia, although it is a little odd because the game never showed Cynthia having a purse on her. Like for real, if you go back and rewatch every cutscene with Cynthia, not once did a purse appear. But it's also here we can find a plate attached to a door. Removing it gives us the Temptation placard. Entering the door, it's a harrowing sight to see. Cynthia is on the brink of death after an extremely violent attack, and although you don't spend enough time with her to develop a deep and emotional connection, her murder is still shocking and quite depressing because she dies believing that everything that just happened was all just one sick dream. Something Henry also desperately wants to believe, given that he comforts her by saying it was.
I feel like I'm dying.
It's okay. It's just a dream.
It is important to note that whoever did this carved something strange into her chest, a string of numbers spelling 16121, clearly a cryptic code or calling card of some sort. After a quick fade out, we find ourselves back where it all began, room 302.
Cynthia? Man, what's that noise out there?
And if a part of you is coping, hoping that Cynthia didn't actually die, well, you can hear emergency sirens outside your window, and if you poke your head out, you can see them heading down into the subway. This is triply confirmed when you head into the living room and hear a broadcast over the radio confirming that Cynthia is in fact dead.
Damn, she's got numbers carved into her chest. I wonder if...
And it was at this moment I couldn't help but notice a little bit of that dark Silent Hill humor here, where the room itself is kind of taunting Henry. Listening to the radio after hearing the death of Cynthia starts a broadcast about how beautiful and sunny the week will be and that we should go outside and enjoy it.
Tomorrow looks to be quite a nice day with warm and sunny weather continuing through the evening, and the weekend we can expect more of the same. So I hope you all get out there and enjoy your weekend.
But clearly we can't, given that the front door is still locked. And if you try to interact with the radio again, it just emits static. It's almost as if the room itself is just spitting in your eye and making fun of your situation. I don't know if you would call this cosmic humor, but I find the idea of this supernatural entity just cleverly taking the piss out of us kind of funny and very Silent Hill. But back on the topic of Cynthia, I said earlier that I had a theory as to why we keep waking up in our bedroom every time we jump through the holes. It seems as though Henry is never physically leaving his bedroom,
and I think that's because
every plunge we take through the bathroom hole causes our consciousness and the physical manifestation of that to appear in each of the dreamlike worlds we visit. Hence why when we wake up, we're back in the bedroom every single time, no matter what hole in the wall we take to go back.
Oh, that's just stupid.
What am I thinking?
This whole situation reminds me of A Nightmare on Elm Street, how Freddy Krueger can conjure dreamlike worlds and invade other people's dreams. And just like Freddy Krueger, if you die in the dream world, you die in real life, which explains why we see EMS retrieving Cynthia's physical body in the subway. And I gotta say, the game sets this up perfectly. Before you even enter the hole, the game shows you Cynthia getting sleepy as she's entering the subway, where then she most likely fell asleep and got sucked into the hostile subway world, which ended up killing her. With all that in mind, we now gotta figure out who's doing it and why. In a sense, we're kind of playing detective, so I guess you could say SH4 is just one giant murder mystery escape room. As for changes within the room, you can check in on Eileen, where she could be seen walking around and napping. There's also a subtle change outside the front door. Instead of 15 bloody handprints, there is now 16. We can infer that Cynthia's death has something to do with that, but what it means, we don't know yet. So heading back to our bathroom, we discovered that the hole in the wall has actually gotten wider, and going through this time around, we find ourselves in an ominous forest. The sound design of this intro is simply immaculate. Like I said before, the quality of this game swings up and down like a pendulum. You will get some beautiful shit like this from time to time. The first thing you'll see in this area is a set of stones with writing we can't comprehend. This serves no purpose this time around, but will make sense later on in the game. You'll also find another wall portal that may seem redundant, but is crucial for advancing the story outside the apartment. Looking through our peephole, we can see it's Eileen. She's ringing our doorbell trying to figure out if we're okay or not, but despite us pounding and screaming at the door, not a single sound or vibration can be heard.
Help me! Help! Let me out of here!
There's something going on in this room.
What do you mean?
It's also at this point we're introduced to another neighbor named Richard. He's an older, rigid, and bitter individual that lives up to his name. Because he's kind of a dick, but thankfully not a completely evil one. Because he, along with Eileen, is concerned for our well-being, so they decide to call the building superintendent.
Well, I'm gonna go call the super.
Yeah, good idea.
Because if anyone would have a key to our door, it would be him, so we'll keep this in mind. Back in the Forrest World, we make our way through an industrial plant of sorts where we fight off a new flying enemy called the Hummer. But past these guys, we find an abandoned car that has its engine still running and the driver's door wide open. Rummaging through the front seat, we discover a written note that states the owner of the car is a man named Jasper, who hasn't been to Silent Hill in a while and hopes to meet the devil here. Now, this note is a little bit of a bombshell because this tells us we're not in South Ashfield anymore, but a random forest outside of Silent Hill, which leads more credence into the theory that every time we go through the holes, our subconscious is being manifested in these dreamlike areas. Moving along, we actually find Jasper in the next area surrounding a bunch of lit candles.
I was the one who found the stone first. In the old days, the
natives called it Nakihona.
If you listen to him yap long enough, he'll mention how there's a local orphanage that had direct ties to the cult of Silent Hill, and allegedly did horrible things to the orphans.
They used to collect orphans and did things to them. Kinda gives you the chills, huh?
Which, according to Jasper, this place isn't too far away, so venturing deeper into the forest, you'll run into a few sniffer dogs along with a weighted trap before you eventually find yourself at the orphanage he was talking about. This is the infamous Wish House, although this is not the first time this place has been mentioned. It was actually foreshadowed in SH3 during the hospital level, which is just really neat to see how Silent Hill 2 and 3 set up narrative threads that would finally make sense in this entry. Now, at this point, our goal is to get inside the Wish House, but the way to do so is a little convoluted. You'll need to explore the forest until you discover a mini graveyard where there's a little kid just standing ominously.
Hey, little boy, what are you doing here?
This kicks off a cutscene where Jasper starts spouting about some third revelation nonsense and slowly gets bricked up over the idea of something happening.
You're finally the third revelation. Something's gonna happen. That nosy guy that was here, he said it too. Something big is gonna happen. Finally, it's gonna happen!
This nonsense makes the little boy bolt away, and normally I would question why there's a random kid in the middle of a forest, but there's an orphanage nearby, so it's not completely out of the ordinary. However, this whole interaction is required because it causes Jasper to appear outside the Wish House, where he allegedly has something to give us, but only if we can quench his thirst.
I could let you have it, but not for free. I'm so thirsty. Oh, chocolate. Oh, chocolate.
Now, this puzzle is really simple if you're the type of player that likes to interact with every little thing, because back in the apartment, there's actually something you can give him. Opening the fridge reveals there's a carton of chocolate milk, which before this point didn't make any sense at all, but now it does. Giving this to him not only rewards you with one of the grossest sound effects ever made,
oh man, that was awesome.
But also a dirty spade.
Here, take this. There's something written on it.
Inspecting it gives us the blood-inscribed spade. Using this on a weird looking hand stump gives us the rusted bloody key, which is exactly what we need to open the orphanage. However, this key is actually cursed. Reading the description states, "He who holds this key shall wander for eternity," and they're not joking. Trying to make your way back to the orphanage will cause the player to be stuck in an infinite loop, causing this kind of Groundhog Day effect whenever they enter through a door. And no matter how many times you try, the outcome will always be the same. So again, this solution is quite simple. You'll need to take a wall portal after finding the key and place it inside your living room storage box. This will free you of the curse and allow you to go back to the orphanage, where at this point you can go back to the apartment, retrieve the key, and then open the orphanage door. Inside, the orphanage is completely abandoned, making the scene with the little boy all the more creepier. There's also a reference to Alessa from Silent Hill 1 via a note on the floor, along with another mention of someone named Walter, the same name that was inscribed on our front door. Also, I already like Jasper way more than Cynthia because this guy actually follows us when we open a door.
I wonder what they did here.
But like every NPC in this game, our time with them is short-lived. On a door suddenly filling with smoke, a new placard called Source appears. This is the same thing that happened to Cynthia before her demise, and just like Cynthia, we witnessed the death of Jasper. We took our eyes off him for 1 second and Jasper spontaneously combusted into flames, which is an extremely brutal way to go, if not one of the most painful ways to go. But before he finally kicks the can, he carves a set of numbers into his chest, 171121. A cryptic code similar to Cynthia's 16121. This can't be a coincidence, but it's far too random to string together any meanings just yet. At least Jasper, unlike Cynthia, died enthusiastically, which further characterizes how much of a troubled individual he was. It didn't have to be like this for him, and that's kinda sad to think about. Waking back up in the bedroom again, Jasper's death is confirmed over the radio just like Cynthia's.
A special news report. In a forest near Silent Hill, the burned corpse of a 30-year-old male was discovered earlier today. The police have ruled it a homicide and are investigating. The numbers 17121 were reportedly carved into the man's body. Due to the marks on the victim, the police are investigating possible links to the Walter Sullivan case 10 years ago.
This broadcast also drops a little bit of a bombshell, giving us a last name to the mysterious Walter guy who keeps getting name dropped. It's Walter Sullivan.
The Walter Sullivan case 10 years ago.
Now that name is pretty important, even more so if you played SH2. However, heading back to the living room, we can hear even more banging on our front door. Thanks to Richard and Eileen, the superintendent Frank is trying to figure out if we're okay.
This is the superintendent. Are you in there, Henry?
Help me! There's something wrong with this room! Help! Let me out of here!
Is anybody home?
Which, fun fact, this is actually Frank Sunderland. And if that last name sounds familiar, that's because he's actually the father of James Sunderland from Silent Hill 2. Now, sadly, Frank never brings up James. Really, the only mention of James you get in this game is when Henry looks at a painting and talks about how him and his wife went missing in Silent Hill, which the phrase his wife is clearly meaning Mary.
Mary?
But still, it's really cool to see this connection no matter how tenuous it is, and its timing is actually perfect, given that in SH2, the name Walter Sullivan was name dropped outside the Blue Creek apartment. In that game, after solving the trash chute puzzle, there's a news article talking about how Walter performed a string of murders before taking his own life within his jail cell, which is interesting, because if Walter is behind all the murders happening currently, how would that be possible if he died many years ago? It doesn't make any sense, but again, this universe doesn't operate on normal rules and logic. Also, we don't have the full story just yet, and there's definitely an element of supernatural magic involved, so it's a paranormal mystery we're solving. Regardless, Frank is unable to get inside our apartment despite having the right key. It won't budge even an inch.
That's strange. It's the right key.
And it's assumed he knows something we don't about this apartment.
I'm sure I heard something in there. Yeah, that sound. It's the same one as back then.
Also, if you're keen-eyed, you'll notice another bloody handprint has been added to the wall, which explicitly tells us that these otherworldly murders of Cynthia and Jasper are somehow connected to these bloody handprints. At this point, all we can do is continue to do what we've done before, and that's following that damn hole in the bathroom. Going through, we find ourselves somewhere extremely damp and disgusting. Before you can even process where we are, we hear the screams of a man begging to be let out.
Get me out of here! Get me out! Get me out of here! Help! Help!
Heading towards the cries for help, we can find a rather large man who's visibly scared for his life.
Get me out! Get me the hell out of here!
Which I have no idea why you can't talk to him here. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever given that we are deadass staring into each other's souls. I could put my slimy fingers in there and finger blast his right nostril if I wanted to. That's how close we are. Now at this point, 3 levels in, I'm pretty sure you get the gist of this game. Every level starts off with you waking up in a strange and unfamiliar place where you find a new person, help them out, and then they die. It happened to Cynthia, it happened to Jasper, and I guarantee it's gonna happen again to this large man. And unlike the subway and forest level, there's actually quite a bit of lore and even nightmare fuel to unpack here. This place is a prison, and we know that given that we can walk inside the cells and see that firsthand. Each room is depressingly bare bones with only a sink, an open toilet, a steel bed, and a desk. But the standout feature is that each cell has a peephole affixed to the upper wall. This is where the wardens would spy on the inmates, meaning every move you made, every shit you took, and every cry for help was witnessed by these wardens. But you see, here's the twist. This prison isn't your average prison, because reading notes left behind in the cells, these inmates weren't actually inmates, but children from the Wish House Orphanage, the same place we just went to last level. Within these very cells, they were subjected to harsh treatment, isolation, and ritualistic punishment as part of the cult's methods of indoctrinating them. You see, these peepholes weren't guards keeping an eye on violent offenders, but they themselves were the offenders. But this is only the tip of the iceberg, as heading down a red ladder, we find ourselves in a winding walkway that loops into itself. You'll want to walk the loop until you reach another red ladder that brings us to the basement. Down here, you'll find the water prison exit key. And the name isn't figurative, but literal, because if you use this key and walk outside, you'll realize the entire prison is located in a large body of water. It's extremely dreamlike and ethereal, so bizarrely foreign that it doesn't even look real, which makes it all the more depressing that something so majestic and otherworldly was the location of some of the most depraved crimes against the innocent. If you dig into this deeper, it's theorized the location of this prison is somewhere in the middle of Toluca Lake, an area we crossed towards the end of Silent Hill 2, which checks out because in the Forrest World, where the orphanage is located, you can actually see the outskirts of this very lake. And as you progress through the upper levels of the water prison, it's slowly becomes more grotesque and corrupted. You'll start to find these wiggling worm-like larvae slithering up and down the walls, fungal-like skeleton spores sprouting from the ground, and walking to the cells, you'll even find more notes from the children, describing how scared they were, with one even pissing themselves from terror. And it's at this point you'll quickly realize that you're not alone. In certain cells, footsteps and shadows can be heard from the peephole. And eventually you'll round a corner and come face to face with this hulking monster. It's just staring and pointing at you menacingly. As long as you don't move, it won't either. This is the twin victim, and one of the more iconic enemies of Silent Hill 4. It features two small childlike faces conjoined at the head, which are perched atop a towering emaciated humanoid body. The creature's arms are elongated and end in massive claw-like hands that it uses to drag itself forward in a disturbingly slow and deliberate manner. Now, despite its size, it's a pretty fair monster to deal with. No bullshit mechanics or annoying behavior. A fairly easy monster to avoid or fight if you need to. However, its true strength is in numbers, and its introduction is probably one of, if not the best out of the entire game. Because before meeting this abomination, you have likely explored 3 to 4 levels of the prison with absolutely zero enemies standing in your way, giving the player a false sense of comfort, making you think this place is completely abandoned. And it's at that moment when your guard is finally down, you cut a corner, and bam, there it is. It's a well-executed introduction, no pun intended, because it's also implied, thanks to that Walter Sullivan article from SH2, that this enemy is actually the 2 victims he murdered, Billy and Miriam Locane. But past the twin victims, we can make our way to the roof where we can turn a water valve, allowing the stream of water to flow down to the basement. This kickstarts a generator located in the basement, which as a result powers on emergency lights, enabling you to see inside every prison cell. This is required for a puzzle coming up, because at this point we'll need to hop through some mysterious holes found in certain cells beginning on the 3rd floor. With each plunge taking us deeper into the lower levels of the prison, you know you did it right when you're spit into a room with 2 twin victims trying to gank you. This means we've reached a previously inaccessible section of the prison, more specifically, the area where the prison guards watched the children from the peephole. Within this room, you discover notes about how the prison was in such a rough condition that some of the doors rusted completely shut, effectively trapping the children in their cells. Now, the guards were either unwilling or unable to free them, so they just watched them from the peephole as they rotted and starved to death. These notes also explain why there are mysterious holes on certain floors. The prison guards would drill holes underneath the cells where orphans passed away, and due to a unique mechanic of the prison where each floor can be rotated using a turning wheel, they would line the holes up and dispose of the bodies without the other orphans catching on. Knowing this is important because it plays into the big puzzle of this area. We will need to rotate the prison cell in a specific order that allows us to reach a secret kitchen located far below. You can even infer that the body chute leading to the kitchen implies that the dead orphans were served as food, a genuinely disturbing revelation. However, I recommend that you don't do that just yet, as one of the best weapons in the game is hidden here. If you rotate the prison in a secret order, you can fall down into a cell containing the stun gun. This weapon was originally introduced in SH3, but that version is inferior to this one in every single way, because this one has infinite charges and can instantly knock down almost every enemy in the game besides Ghost. I'm telling you, if you want to play this game on easy mode, I highly recommend it. But once you line up the holes correctly, the large man's cell on the 1st floor will suddenly open up. And if you head back down the ladder, you'll encounter a new cutscene.
Making it make standing anymore. When we stand in there, can't make decide to be inside.
We can find the man from before interacting with the same kid we kept seeing throughout the Forrest World. The man seems deathly scared of the kid, almost pleading with him in a sense.
Come on, let me out of here. I'm gonna die in here.
It's within this scene we get a major plot revelation.
Who is that boy? And who are you?
His name's Walter. Walter Sullivan.
And we learn that the little boy's name is actually Walter Sullivan. We also discover this large man's name is Andrew DeSalvo.
I'm Andrew DeSalvo.
He was a prison guard here, and it's heavily implied that he personally mistreated some of the children, Walter specifically. Now in my eyes, this guy is pretty evil. Not in the traditional sense, but more so in the fact that he knew what was going on in this facility and was complicit in the abuse that occurred here.
I used to work at the orphanage watching the kids. They tried to make it seem like an orphanage, but according to that town's holy scriptures, it was actually the center of their religion. And that kid Walter, he was really into that mumbo-jumbo.
From his dialogue, it's implied he was misled in what would actually be occurring here as a job, but this gives me the same energy as tyrants and malicious men that use the excuse of, I'm just doing my job.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Now with the tower properly aligned, we can jump down the holes again to make our way to the kitchen. Here we find another placard, this time called Watchfulness. And as we already know, every time we get one of these, it usually means someone has died. To no one's surprise, we discover Andrew DeSalvo's corpse in what appears to be a torture room. And they got my man laid out like a damn JJK character.
ごめん、あまない。俺は今、お前のために怒ってない。誰も憎んじゃいない。今はただただ、この世界が心地いい。天上天下、唯我と。
This time, the code marked into his body is 18121, with Cynthia's code being 16121, Jasper's being 17121, and now Andrew's 18121. We can see the second digit is increasing by 1 with each victim. Given that Andrew said that Walter was going to kill him,
Walter's gonna kill me!
We can assume that Walter is behind these string of murders. But it's hard for me to believe that a kid is pulling all of this off. There has to be something far more sinister at play. Now with everything that has just transpired, I can confidently say the water prison is one of, if not the most disturbing places in Silent Hill 4. It's one of those areas that looks fairly normal until you read all the lore and realize how brutal it actually was. Waking back up in our bed, we can see that quite a bit of time has passed and it's nearing dusk. Leaving the bedroom, you'll notice the apartment is slowly deteriorating as a geyser of blood has flowed out of our bathroom shower, with Henry having hardly any reaction to it. Kinda crazy. And looking at the bathroom hole, it's only continued to get even bigger. But before entering again, it's recommended to look at the people as you'll find Frank and Eileen still plotting a way to get inside. However, that's when Frank states something extremely concerning.
Just tried to open it up, but it looks like something's blocking it from the inside. Anyway, it's not the first time.
We're not the first victim this has happened to, and according to Frank, we might not be the only ones in danger. Also, he mutters some crazy shit about keeping an umbilical cord in his room.
The umbilical cord I keep in a box in my room. Lately, it's started to smell terrible.
Dog, what the fuck?
Umbilical cord?
Oh, well, I forget I said anything.
And as expected, there is yet another bloody handprint, this time representing Andrew DeSalvo. Taking a plunge through the hole yet again, we wake up inside an unfamiliar alleyway. From above, we can hear what sounds like a wild assortment of zoo animals. It's not particularly scary, just annoying. And it doesn't take us long to figure out what's making all the noise, as walking down a set of stairs causes a new enemy type to appear. These are gumheads. I don't have anything profound to say about them, they're just another fodder enemy that the game throws at you. However, they do have an ape-like build, which is reinforced by the fact that they make monkey noises as they parade around the level. They're pretty easy to avoid, but should you have to fight them, the stun gun makes quick work of them. Making our way past the gumheads and down another flight of stairs, we run into someone unexpected.
Ouch! Damn it.
It's our neighbor Richard Braintree, and how the hell did he survive that fall? Bro should have at least a shattered shoulder, femur, and a concussion after eating shit like that. But physics aside, Richard didn't come unprepared, as he has a whole ass magnum and was mere moments from blowing a crater in us. Thankfully he didn't, or this game would be really short, and recognizes that we're neighbors.
Hey, you're the guy that lives across from me.
Yeah, my name's Henry.
I gotta say, despite knowing Richard is a dick, just like his name entails, it's genuinely refreshing to find a character who isn't being completely oblivious or delusional. Richard has at least above room temperature IQ and quickly deduces that supernatural forces are at play.
If you're here too, then there must be something wrong with the whole apartment building. That must explain what happened to that other guy, too.
And also gives us context on the previous resident of our room.
What other guy?
The guy who lived in 302 before you. A journalist. He disappeared one day.
However, I can't exactly call him smart, because instead of joining forces with Henry, which is the safest and most logical thing to do in this situation, instead he just fucks off and wishes us luck.
Anyway, I'm getting the hell out of here.
Is he stupid? Now, what's interesting about this level is the attention to detail, because this giant red sign where we meet Richard is actually something we've seen before. It's the Hotel South Ashfield sign directly outside of our apartment. This dream world is taking place not too far away from our own home, and what's even crazier is that if you look out the apartment window during this level, you'll notice that Richard Braintree is asleep in his room as all of this is happening, which to me is the most solid piece of evidence that the only reason Henry and others can explore these corrupted worlds is because we're sucked into these nightmare worlds as we're sleeping. Which might also explain why the game over screen for SH4 is your bedroom ceiling. Dying in the dream world would cause Henry's physical body in the apartment to die as well. Like, when you put all of that together, that's some really neat attention to detail. Which, if you're subscribed to this channel, like you should be, I'm not asking, I'm telling you to subscribe here. Don't look at me silly, click that fucking red button. You'll know that I love shit like this in games, so when I say this is the most frustrating Silent Hill, it's not because of the story. This game is well written, with many clues and clever details like this one. Besides the introduction of the twin victims, this was the first time in the game where I was like, huh, that's kinda genius. So with all this in mind, we'll need to survive this ordeal while also trying to keep Braintree alive if possible. Because this time around, it's not a random stranger in danger, this is our neighbor. Shit is hitting the fan closer and closer to our home with each level. Ducking into a nearby door, we can hear the sounds of something gurgling in pain. This is a sound effect we haven't heard yet, but one you'll soon appreciate, because rounding the corner, we find ourselves in someone's kitchen where a birthday party was taking place. Next to that is the source of the sound. A ghost has been impaled by a sword, causing it to be completely immobilized. Inspecting it, you'll receive the ghost's key, and you have the optional choice of removing the sword. Now, this sword isn't just any old sword, it's a sword of obedience, and is one of only 2 ways you can permanently take out the ghost enemies. However, there's only 5 in the entire game, so you have to be strategic about when and why you use them. With the ghost key in hand, we're able to escape this room and make our way down a metal staircase that brings you to a sporting goods store. Inside, we can find another portal back to room 302, which I highly recommend coming back because there's a lot of freaky incidents that will occur. First off, you'll hear knocking at the front door. but looking through the peephole, no one is there. However, there is a giant bloody sign that warns we should check on our neighbor soon. This is more than likely referring to Richard Braintree. On top of this, if you look out the window, you have a rare chance of spotting Andrew DeSalvo's severed head passing by. Or you might even see a Robbie the Rabbit blimp floating in the sky. This shows us how the lines between the dream world and the real world are slowly blurring as we continue to make progress. Back in the other world, we can leave the sporting goods store only to find ourselves in a pet store with a pack of sniffer dogs guarding it. It's very easy to miss, but it's important to grab the Albert sports key here, which allows us to backtrack to the sports store and open a previously locked door. Doing so allows us to eventually find an elevator where we catch Richard Braintree holding the Walter Sullivan kid at gunpoint. And according to Braintree, this isn't the first time he's seen this kid.
Are you the kid he was talking about? You live in that apartment too, huh? Say, you look a lot like a little punk that I once caught sneaking around there. Do you know something about what's going on?
This interaction tells us that Braintree is an aggressive and intimidating individual that totes the line of him being a bully. I understand his actions are fueled by a sense of suspicion and paranoia, but holding a kid at gunpoint because you think he's shady is a little too far. I don't trust the kid either, but I'm not gonna bash his brains in. After this point, we have to make our way through a lot of empty rooms that make this area feel bigger than it actually is, before eventually finding a bar. And let me tell you, within this bar, you'll find one of the best weapons in SH4, and that's the rusty axe. There's a good reason why anytime you see Silent Hill 4 gameplay, people are using this weapon. Having great speed, power, and reach, this axe simply has it all. Its charge attack is also very deadly, allowing you to blitz anyone in your path. I don't say this often, but it's a 10 out of 10 weapon. This, along with the stun gun, pretty much guarantees that you're gonna win almost every single fight you get into. Now, within this bar, there's a small keypad puzzle you have to solve, but it's so easy a baby could do it. All you have to do is look out of the apartment window and input the last 4 digits of this bar's telephone number, which is 3750. Which, this is a little bit of a gripe that some players have with Silent Hill 4, the puzzles aren't exactly puzzles, but more or less feel like fetch quests. In my opinion, the only puzzle that actually made you think was lining up the holes in the water prison level. Now, maybe it's just me, but these type of go fetch this thing kind of puzzles get very repetitive and boring. It almost feels like the devs are really trying to pad out these areas, which is something that will only become more apparent as you play. Entering through the door, we hear the screams of a grown-ass man. And after running up an endless staircase with a bitch-ass ghost following us the entire time, we reach a door where we find yet another placard, which confirms our suspicions. Entering through the door, we find Richard experiencing a brutal way to go. He's been strapped to a chair and has effectively been served the death penalty as Kid Walter points out the window and phases out of existence. Richard's final words is that Kid Walter isn't actually a kid, but is the 1121 man. Additionally, looking at Richard's face, we can see that code again. He has 19121 on his forehead. Given what we know about this code so far, each one represents a different victim, but we still don't have exact motives or what these deaths are accomplishing. But as always, we find ourselves waking back up in room 302, and like the past 3 victims, we get a radio broadcast confirming the death of Richard.
Looks like another one, Captain. Got 1121 on his head. It's just like that case from 10 years ago. Yeah, that Walter Sullivan case. But Sullivan's dead. They even got the body. Must be some crazy copycat. Yeah, but even so...
And what's even crazier is that looking out of the window, we get a close-up of a creepy man in room 207 pointing at room 303, which is Eileen's room. If you've been paying attention, the game basically tells you who this man is right here. Back in the prison level, Andrew DeSalvo told us that the little kid's name is Walter Sullivan.
His name's Walter. Walter Sullivan.
And given that we just saw Kid Walter pointing just like this mere moments ago in Richard's room, and now we see this creepy adult man doing the same thing in the same exact room, the game is straight up telling us this creepy guy is the Walter Sullivan that's been name dropped so many times so far. Now that we've identified Walter and we know his next target, it's a good time to check in on Eileen. Looking through the people, we can see she's all dressed up, which makes sense given that at the beginning of the game, she mentioned she was getting ready for a party.
Hope my luck changes before the party.
However, if you look again, she seems like she's taking a nap, which is not great. This is the way Walter Sullivan gets to you. And finally, looking out of our front door, we can find Frank Sunderland just staring at our door entranced. So as always, we know what we need to do. We dive into the hole yet again. But this time around, the nightmare is taking place right outside of our door. We're inside the apartment, but it's been heavily corrupted as bright red flesh and grated floors overtake the hallways. We can also see Walter Sullivan knocking on room 303, which is Eileen's room. If this level follows the formula of every level prior, it means Eileen is in danger and will be the 20th victim if he succeeds.
It looks like my apartment. What the hell is this?
Within the apartment, you're able to explore just about every room besides a select few. Each room contains little pieces of world building that gives context for what each neighbor does or did in their past. It's an interesting concept because someone's living space is a window into what kind of person they are. For example, in room 301, which is right next to Henry's, we learn his neighbor was an absolute degenerate gooner that piled up mountains worth of lewd magazines. But within the same room, we can find 3 items that will help us: a red slip of paper on a desk, the superintendent's key behind the ominous red photo of Frank, and a key to locker 106. Once you have all these items, an elderly looking ghost will appear, so we duck into a nearby apartment portal. In the apartment, we get a bombshell revelation under our door. A note tells us that the cryptic codes in all the victims' bodies is actually a count out of 21, so the one in the middle was actually a slash, not a digit, meaning that Cynthia was 16 out of 21, Jasper was 17, Andrew 18, and Richard 19. This also means that Richard's final words tells us that Walter sacrificed himself after committing 10 murders, as he was the 11th victim. Now, how Walter's been able to continue the murder spree after offing himself is yet to be seen, and we also don't have an answer as to why there are 2 Walters within these worlds, the adult one and the kid one. Which, by the way, speaking of Walter, he's right outside our door. Looking through the peephole during this level gives a random chance that Walter will walk up and stare inside before walking away. However, it seems like Walter left us a nasty gift. Looking in our supply closet, you'll see it started to start out blood the same way our bathroom shower did. It can't be a coincidence that the more we learn about Walter's plan, the more unhinged our apartment becomes. Now, back in the other world, if we pass by our own room, we can find Kid Walter beating on the door asking for his mother, before disappearing out of thin air. It's also interesting to note that our room seems to be the only room that's spared from the corrupted blood and rust that's plaguing the apartment. Our apartment means something to Walter, but we don't know why. We can't enter our apartment because the door is locked, but we can use the red paper from before to slip a note underneath. More on this later. Trying to enter Eileen's room is also unsuccessful due to it being locked as well. So our next objective is to find a key and gain entry. In theory, if we can get to Eileen before Walter, we might just be able to save her. So heading down to the 2nd floor, we cut around a corner to come face to face with Walter himself. He's sat down on a set of stairs looking rather pitiful, and if you try to attack him here, the game just won't let you. Now, interacting with him isn't mandatory, but if you do, he offers quite a peculiar gift.
I got this from Miss Galvin. A long time ago. She was younger than me back then. She looked so happy, holding her mother's hand. Here. I'll give it to you.
Now, normally I would say we should take this, but remember who's giving it to us. A mentally insane serial killer. It's best to leave this item and walk away from it because if you decide to take it with you, Walter leaves a lovely gift inside your apartment later in the game. But for the sake of storytelling, I will take this doll even though I shouldn't. Heading to the 1st floor, we hear an odd shuddering sound. and happen across a pile of dead sniffer dogs. Now this is a really neat detail because we didn't kill these dogs, so it's implied that Walter was the one that took them out. An interesting little observation that subtly tells us that Walter might not be completely in control of these dream worlds. But down here we can use the locker key we found on the 3rd floor on the resident mailboxes to find an optional piece of world building. It's not required to beat the game, but you'll find love letters written by a man named Mike, which is Henry's next door neighbor in 301. The same neighbor that had all those Gooner magazines. We can see that these letters are addressed to another woman in the building named Rachel. This is an optional mini quest per se, but we'll circle back to this in a bit. Heading to room 105, we can use the superintendent's key we found on the 3rd floor to enter Frank Sunderland's room, where we discover another red slip of paper along with half of one. In this same spot, we can also find the apartment keys, which allows us to explore every room in the building besides room 302, which is our room, and room 303, which is Eileen's. There's also a note in Frank's room that gives more context for the umbilical cord he was muttering about earlier with Eileen. Apparently 30 years ago, a child was born inside Henry's apartment. However, after the home birth, the baby was abandoned and all that remained in the room was the umbilical cord. For some reason, Frank couldn't bring himself to get rid of it, and if you look back in his living room, we can assume the red box in his shelf that stinks like shit has to be that 30-year-old umbilical cord. Now, Silent Hill 4 isn't very subtle in its storytelling, but if you've been analyzing everything that's been happening so far, we can confidently assume that Walter Sullivan is the kid that was abandoned in Henry's apartment 30 years ago, which also explains why Kid Walter is obsessed with the room and calling for his mother. Now, with the apartment keys in hand, we could explore every room, but not every room is made equally. For example, room 107 contains nothing interesting at all, which honestly could be said for about half the rooms in this building. And 106 is only important if you want to learn about the Mike love letter plotline I alluded to earlier, which again is not necessary to complete the game. But if you are curious, we learned that Mike from room 301 had a crush on a nurse named Rachel who lived in room 106. Mike would write love letters to her, but opening the mailbox on the 1st floor, we learned that not a single one was read, which is not a great sign for Mike. So entering room 106, we can find Rachel's nurse uniform, which looks almost identical to the nurses we saw in Silent Hill 3. But what's even cooler is that it's also theorized that Rachel was a nurse that took care of Laura and Mary in SH2. I know that sounds like I made it the fuck up, but we can infer this because towards the end of SH2, when Laura gives James Mary's letter, she has this to say.
But she said it in her letter.
What letter?
Wanna read it? But don't tell Rachel, okay?
Who's Rachel?
She was our nurse. I took it from her locker.
Again, it could be two different Rachels, but I love this theory and it makes a lot of sense in my head. But this entire mini plotline comes full circle when you notice a telephone in Rachel's room that has a phone number stating, "My darling's number." Now look here, unless you absolutely care about the ending to this love plotline, I highly recommend you don't ring this fuck ass telephone. Dialing it causes not only the ghost to spawn in every room of the apartment, but there's an ear-piercingly loud telephone ringing throughout the entire apartment. Like, bro, it doesn't matter if you're on the 1st or 3rd fucking floor. It's a never-ending loop until you find it. And finding it is 2.5 bitches to do because the audio level doesn't change at all. I am in a room that is nowhere near this telephone and it still sounds the exact same. The devs straight up didn't add a proximity effect, so you won't find any audible hints as to where it is. Now, you would assume the telephone would be in Mike's room, you know, room 301, but that's where the twist comes in. The ringing leads to room 202 and not room 301. Rachel never loved Mike, and we can infer that Mike was probably a stalker. I mean, look at how much lewd material was in his room. That shit is not attractive, so I don't blame her. Also, fun fact, while I was researching about Rachel, I learned that if you look out the apartment window, you can sometimes see her trying to give her lover some sloppy toppy. I'm not even joking. For the second time, I know that sounds like I just made it the fuck up, but no, look. You can see Rachel trying to give her lover some affection, but he's pushing away. This is literally that "babe, please have sex with me" meme in real time. The apartment is full of stories just like this one that establish which neighbors did and did not like each other. For example, the person in room 101 shot and killed room 102's cat, and you can even learn that Richard Braintree beat the hell out of Mike at one point.
How do you like that, you sick little freak? You had it coming to you.
Get your ass out of here before you really piss me off!
But to go over all these would take way too long, plus our main focus should be on Eileen as she's still in danger. So heading to room 203 and 102, we can find the other halves of the torn red papers, which we can then place underneath room 302 to get clues on how to get Eileen's key. It's also worth noting that going to room 207, which is Richard Braintree's room, allows you to get the revolver he had before Walter electrocuted him. But like any hard-hitting weapon with limited ammo, it's best to save this for when you need it the most. Also in this very room, you can see adult Walter staring at Eileen's room ominously. He's definitely getting ready to strike. So heading back to room 302 and reading the red slips of paper causes a doll key to magically spawn in Henry's bedroom, specifically on the side of the bed that's next to the window. Now, I never really understood why this happens. Like, how does reading a piece of paper make a key appear when no one can get in or out of the apartment? I feel like the key should have always been there, which would make more sense logically, but I guess all you can do is chalk it up to magic. Either way, this is the key we need to open Eileen's door, so we head back to the other world and make our way to her apartment. But just as we're about to open it, we hear this horrifying scream. Going inside, we're too late. A disgusting amount of blood is streaked across the floor as Kid Walter stands above Eileen's mangled body. Etched into her back is the victim code. Eileen was selected to be the 20th victim out of 21. However, in this moment, even when Eileen is knocking on death's door, something is odd here.
Did you find your mommy?
She thanks Kid Walter and asks if he found his mommy. She also warns him that this place is dangerous and he needs to get out of here. This is not something you would say to someone who just tried to kill you, which makes me wonder if Kid Walter actually helped Eileen in some way. But before we can ask Eileen what happened, she collapses on the floor, which completely breaks our boy Henry. Waking back up in the apartment, the shroud of night has fallen. And looking out of our window, we can see an ambulance is carrying Eileen away. Heading out to the living room, we can enter Eileen's peephole to find the once lifeless Robbie the Rabbit plushie now pointing a finger at us, as if it's our fault for what happened to Eileen. This is just my headcanon, but I believe Walter was one who did this to taunt us. I don't actually think that doll is sentient or anything. Additionally, you can eavesdrop on the police statement taking place in her apartment.
So they took the victim to St. Jerome's, huh?
Yeah, she's not gonna make it. She had numbers in her back, too. Walter Sullivan copycat. Round 3, huh?
They aren't positive that Eileen will make it, but we learn that she's technically still alive and heading to St. Jerome's Hospital. Despite having numbers on her back, I'm quite positive Eileen will pull through because there wasn't a placard on her door like the other victims had. It's also interesting hearing the cops be frustrated that they can't link any evidence to the murders, which makes sense given that all these murders are taking place within a supernatural otherworld.
The weird thing is, there were no clues. Crime scenes were always spotless. No fingerprints, no fibers, nothing. Just the numbers, 20121. I've been a cop for a long time, but I never seen a case like this one. It's almost like they were killed by a ghost or something.
Heading to the front door, you'll find a new note on the ground that's different from anything else we've seen thus far. It's a brand new item called the Succubus Talisman, and looking through the peephole, the 20th handprint hasn't appeared, further reinforcing that there's still a chance for Eileen. At this point, if you try to rely on what's worked before, you'll be sorely disappointed. When you head into the bathroom, you'll find the giant hole in the wall has been sealed away. This is where the Succubus Talisman and the placards we found earlier finally come in handy. Heading to the supply closet, a place that's been ignored almost the entire game, we're now able to place the talisman on the wall, creating an entirely new hole. But you see, it's not yet complete. We'll need to place each one of the placards we found into a corresponding slot. The Watchfulness one we got from the death of Andrew DeSalvo, Temptation from Cynthia, Chaos from Richard, and Source from Jasper. Once all of these are aligned, a new portal in our supply closet opens up. So taking the familiar plunge within an unfamiliar area leads us to strange places. Waking up on the floor of an operating room, we bear witness to some diabolical, outright down bad behavior. Walter Sullivan is waltering his way inside a cadaver.
Walter. Put your dick away, Walter.
He is raw dogging that shit, no lube, just straight umbilical fluid. I genuinely cannot think of a lore reason for him doing this besides maybe showcasing how insane, depraved, and hateful he is. This cutscene is all kinds of strange. Walter notices our presence and hunches towards us like a fent addict before just letting us run out of the door. I understand his goal is to kill Eileen, but like, what was the point of all that? Like, bro, you didn't have to do that. Now, if you decide to walk back into the room, he's nowhere to be found, but you'll notice Walter's cadaver has sprung to life, which we'll just ignore for now. This area is the St. Jerome's Hospital that the police officers in Eileen's room were referring to.
They took the victim to St. Jerome's, huh?
And exploring the first floor, we can find a room that features a prominent medical examination. Taking a closer look, we can see that it's Eileen's. This gives Henry some much needed hope that she's probably still alive. But honestly, the game spoils that Eileen is alive way before you even see her because you can pick up her purse on the first floor which states Eileen only weapon. Which in my opinion kinda defeats the whole suspense of if she's gonna make it or not. I would prefer that it either didn't say Eileen only weapon until you found her, or just not have it be on the first floor. But regardless, heading up to the second floor, we encounter something downright goofy. I don't know whose idea it was, but someone decided that ghost wheelchairs that smack the shit out of each other was a great idea. It's so freaking goofy, man, and it's made even sillier if you run into the chair. Because somehow a wheelchair can truck Henry across the hallway like a D1 linebacker. I'm at a loss for words with these enemies, like I can't defend this, man. But ignoring the wheelchairs, you'll notice this extremely long hallway has roughly 20 doors. And you can actually go inside every single one, but not every room is made equally. A majority of the rooms have scenes that depict body horror and pregnancy in various ways. For example, in one room you can see what looks like a pregnant mattress with needles jammed into the womb. And going to the room opposite of it, you can find a mattress with spores growing out of it. When you put those two pieces of imagery together, it kinda represents birth, although in a very twisted and malformed way. But then you'll have rooms that seemingly exist just for the sake of it, like there's one room where there's a padded cell with charred bodies. I don't think there's a deeper meaning here. Now, I've spent a long time trying to analyze what every room could mean, but I genuinely think the developers just wanted to create cool shit in each room, even if there wasn't always a deeper meaning. Aw hell, they got Henry trapped in the cum room. But if I had to tell you which three rooms stood out to me the most, the first one is a room full of spikes where if you stay in here long enough, it collapses on top of you. And if you're feeling like that section gave you a little bit of deja vu, the same thing happened in SH3 during the Haunted Mansion.
I'm so sorry. This place is just falling apart.
The second one is this room where it just rains. Something that shouldn't be physically possible indoors, so seeing this in such a confined space, and only in this space, activated a neuron in my brain that just made me feel some kind of way. And lastly, but not surprisingly, is one of the most memorable things out of this entire game. Even if you haven't played Silent Hill 4 before, you've probably seen or heard about this room on the internet.
I've never even played this game, and even I have heard of this godforsaken room.
Me too, man. It's like one of the only things I know about when it comes to Silent Hill.
Dude, I've never actually played Silent Hill, but I've seen this room before and it freaked me out.
I looked at that room once and never looked again.
Even if you haven't played, you've definitely seen that room.
Which remind me a lot of...
And well, just have a look at it yourself. Yeah, it's a giant twitching head of Eileen that's making extremely suggestive sounds. I've heard a lot of people say that this room is what freaked them out and made them turn off their consoles, but to me this isn't scary, but more so unsettling. And that's not because of the visuals, but due to the audio. It feels like my ears are being assaulted. This is why I stressed earlier how important sound design is and the way it builds terror in the player. Overall, I think this hallway is really neat, but I don't understand why the developers decided to blow their creative load here, and all within this one hallway. It's really cool, but I can't help but feel like a lot of these things could have been spread out within all the levels we've been through thus far. The Forrest World and the Building World could have benefited greatly by having some of these set pieces be placed in those worlds, because the majority of those areas were filled with large spaces with really nothing of interest. Like, after experiencing this hallway, I wish every level before had something like this in it. Every room in this hallway has a unique and memorable moment, but it's hard for me to say the same for the majority of the previous levels. The only thing that really scratched that itch for me is the apartment itself, the outside of the water prison, and the giant tunneling worm found in the subway. Everything else felt like I was just going through the motions, which sucks because this gripe I have with the game will be important in a little bit. Now, if we want to progress through this level and find Eileen, we need to go through the second to final door on the right side of this hallway. Within, you'll find a rather inconspicuous room containing only a serpent statue. Within its mouth is the hospital room key, but upon grabbing it, this happens. Out of nowhere, a giant bird cage slams shut around you. I was pretty confused at first and thought maybe I would have to put the key back on or a dummy item for it to get off of me, but the solution is so damn simple. You can just use the key you just got to open the birdcage door. This is one of the only times in the game where I felt kinda dumb. But with the key in hand, we can open the only locked door in this hallway where we can find none other than Eileen herself. She's in a rough shape with her body battered with scars, bruises, and bandages, but thankfully she's alive. And checking in on her starts a really important cutscene that fundamentally changes the entire game going forward.
Eileen, relax!
The scene is just heartbreaking because for Eileen to have that intense of a reaction, you know the scars on her body run deeper than what's on the surface. Walter really messed her up mentally and physically with the brutal assault.
Henry? From next door? What are you doing here?
I don't know where to start.
But after catching up with Eileen and explaining what's been happening, she's reluctant to believe us at first, but we're able to re-jog her memory.
And I saw you get attacked too.
What are you talking about? I'm supposed to believe that?
But it's true. And there was a kid with you.
I remember now. I was getting ready to go to my friend's party. The boy protected me from the man with the coat.
We learn from Eileen that Kid Walter actually saved her from adult Walter, which explains why when we found her in the apartment, she was thanking Kid Walter and asking if he was okay. That little guy was the only thing stopping her from becoming the 20th victim, which at face value doesn't make any sense given that saving Eileen goes against adult Walter's plan. But when you realize Kid Walter saved Eileen because she was nice to him a long time ago, it makes a lot more sense. We know this because back in the apartment world, adult Walter told us this himself. He met Eileen a long time ago when they were once the same age.
I got this from Miss Galvin. A long, long time ago. She was younger than me back then.
So even though adult Walter wanted to kill Eileen to fulfill his plan, Kid Walter didn't want that to happen. So with all this in mind and the gravity of the situation, Eileen joins us here, and this is where the game really changes.
But I do know that if you get killed here, then you die in the real world too. Anyway, the only way out of here is through that hole.
Okay. Okay, take me with you.
Unlike Cynthia, who was with us for all of 2 seconds, Eileen is with us for the rest of the game, and you can't just leave her behind. If you do, there are consequences that will slowly distort your playthrough and even impact the ending you might get. Plus, in most cases, you won't even be able to progress through the levels without her by your side. She doesn't just teleport wherever you go, you have to guide her everywhere you go. So yeah, SH4 just turned into one giant escort mission, and if there's one thing that the majority of gamers hate, that's escort missions. But thankfully, Eileen isn't the worst character to escort, and with the right setup, she's actually stronger than Henry in some cases. While I do find the process of escorting Eileen to be tedious at times, I don't really hate it. I mean, it's Eileen. How can you hate her? She's amazing. So in the grand scheme of things, it's not that bad. Trust me, I've escorted the president's daughter before. There are far worse escort missions.
Oh, you pervert!
Now, heading out of the room, you'll notice the wheelchairs have vanished and replaced with something just as goofy. Remember that corpse Walter was busting a nut inside earlier? Yeah, that's a new common enemy called the Patient. Which, I gotta say, Silent Hill 4's enemies don't have the most creative names. They're all very matter-of-fact. But these towering figures are stiff, feminine slabs of meat that are comprised of mangled body parts and open sores. Visually, they're disgusting amalgamations of body horror, but audibly, they're so damn goofy, man. They don't make a lot of noise, just marching at the player in eerie stillness, but as soon as you hit them, you're delighted with this. Maybe it's a difference in culture, but burping sounds after hitting a stilted and motionless creature is not scary at all. I mean, I kinda understand why they burp. A decomposing body is filled with gas, so striking them would release the pressure, but come on now. I can't defend this enemy just like I can't defend the ghost wheelchairs. Now heading back to the first floor, we discover the elevator door has now pried itself open, allowing us to leave this section. But before we do so, we'll need to head back to the apartment, and this is where a unique interaction with Eileen occurs. In theory, we should be able to squeeze her through the hole and wind up back in the apartment, but upon doing so, she's nowhere to be found. On top of this, entering the living room, a strange message appears stating that, quote, "The air in this room feels heavy." This might seem like nothing happened, but you'll quickly realize the room isn't healing you anymore. This is a pretty symbolic moment, because before, Walter has been preserving us, likely because he needs us or something in the room to complete his plans. But now that we're actively threatening his goals by protecting Eileen, we've become a target, and this is one of the many ways he's trying to win against us. It's also here you'll find your ceiling fan has crashed on the floor, along with a unique key magically appearing under your door, which is required to beat this level. And if you're wondering what happened to Eileen, it's only when heading back you realize why she wasn't in the apartment.
Oh, Henry.
Have you been here the whole time?
Yeah? And I didn't see any hole either. You just disappeared all of a sudden.
Only Henry can see the holes, which means Eileen has just been stuck in this room all by herself. Which is a little weird to me because that implies she just watched Henry phase through a fucking wall and didn't even say anything as we were doing it. But it's here she does make an interesting comment about how if she's left alone, she will eventually be cursed. Which isn't her speaking in hyperbole, she really means that. Because on top of having to escort Eileen, you also have to make sure she doesn't get possessed, which is a new hidden mechanic introduced in SH4. Simply put, anytime Eileen takes damage or is left alone in certain rooms, she will slowly become more possessed, which is visually represented by bloody streaks flowing around her body. If she becomes possessed, she will start to talk more like an infant and even speak in tongues if it gets bad enough. So our goal is to make sure that doesn't happen. Heading through the newly opened elevator shaft, it's far more gruesome than you would expect. Looking beneath your feet, you can see that a bunch of bodies were mangled inside the large gears. This is an excruciating way to go, and something you can easily miss if you just run through this part. Now, using the small key we found in the apartment, we can open the elevator gate, bringing us to a rather long stairwell with more of the patients from earlier. And if you thought these were goofy before, wait until you knock one over and watch them slide down the stairs. I didn't edit those sounds in, that's actually what happens in game. At the end of the stairwell, we find ourselves in yet another stairwell. but this one is within a fog-like otherworld with a trail of blood leading to the very end. This foggy stairwell will serve as a nexus point between the different worlds Walter wants us to see. It's also within this nexus point we can head back to the apartment where you'll notice a new detail in the travel animation. If you look closely, there's streaks of blood leading back to our apartment, which is not a good sign. And upon entering our living room, we get our first haunting. This is going to be different for every player, but the most common one is the windows opening and slamming shut. There are roughly 14 different hauntings that can happen, from ghost kids, crazy clocks, to even bloody couches harming you. I don't know how that works, maybe it gives you HIV through the pillows. But one of the craziest ones is a bunch of ghost babies appearing in your walls. This only happens if you took that shabby doll from Walter earlier in the game, which is why I warned against taking it. Every time you enter your apartment, it's a gamble if something horrible will happen or not. So whereas before, I would say go to your apartment as much as possible, now, I recommend avoiding it unless you need to save or it's essential to progress the game. But thankfully, you're not SOL. You can get rid of these hauntings with items you've come across up until this point. These items are the Saint Medallions and Holy Candles. All you have to do is walk up with the medallion in hand or place a holy candle nearby for it to simply go away. I know this might seem tedious, but it's worth doing because depending on how many hauntings you do or do not clean up will impact the ending you get. Also, fun fact, it was only at this point of the game that I realized if you idle in the apartment for more than 10 minutes, you'll hear random knocking on your door. Now, maybe I'm stupid, but I didn't know this was a thing and thought I was going crazy. Please tell me I'm not the only one who didn't know this. Now, back in the foggy stairwell, we find at the very bottom, there's another door. Going through it, we find ourselves on top of a metallic catwalk with oddly familiar piping lining the walls. And it's not until you unlock a side door and walk through that you realize, oh, we're back in the subway section of the game again. And this is where Silent Hill 4 started to lose me. It's already enough that the game has turned into an escort mission, but also having to backtrack through each level we've already been through with only a few tweaks here and there is extremely boring to me. Now, I understand there's a reason why the game turned out this way. According to interviews with Silent Hill 4's director, Suguru Murakoshi, production on Silent Hill 3 and 4 began right after SH2 ended, so to say the devs were crunched on resources and time is a little bit of an understatement. And it seems like Silent Hill 4 got the shorthand of the stick, which explains the decision to have the player repeat the same levels and certain areas feeling empty and underbaked. So instead of wasting time recovering every detail of areas we've already explored previously, I want to highlight what's different and the significance of each one, starting with the subway section. For the most part, this place hasn't changed, besides a few new enemy placements and a slightly different puzzle you'll need to solve. Following a trail of extremely dark streaky hair leading into the subway turnstiles, we find that the late Cynthia has been resurrected into a ghost. Her design is visually unique because it represents a Japanese vengeful spirit, similar to Samara from The Ring or Kayako from The Grudge. Which I gotta say, you can just tell someone on the dev team loves Cynthia because they did a fantastic job on her model both dead and alive. I mean, just looking at her hair alone, it must have been a nightmare to model that properly. My only regret with Cynthia is that I didn't exercise her here. I thought this would be the only level she appeared in, but spoiler alert, that's not true. Also, one of the easy things you can miss on this level is that there's actually a brand new item hidden on the top section of the subway. It's called the Silver Bullet, and it's one of the strongest things you can get in this game. Actually so strong that you can only find 3 of them in the entire game, and they're pretty well hidden. So you're probably wondering what makes it so damn good, and that's because it has the ability to instantly and permanently kill a ghost with one shot. You have not experienced true catharsis until you've dropped one of these bitch-ass ghosts with a silver bullet. It's so damn satisfying after all the bullshit they put you through. But again, there's only 3 of them in the entire game, so it's recommended to only use them on unique ghosts going forward. But if we want to progress, get prepared for a shit ton of backtracking. First, we'll need to find a toy key from underneath our door. Taking this key into the heart of the subway, we can find a toy box which upon unlocking it, gives us the filthy coin. Afterwards, you need to take this coin back to your kitchen sink to wash it and then bring it to a marked vending machine, giving us the murder scene key. However, there's a slight issue with getting to the murder scene. See, to make our way back there, we need to take the same ladder from before that brought us to the depths of the subway. But the thing is, Eileen won't be able to follow us here. She got a busted ass arm, so climbing a ladder safely is out of the question. So unfortunately, we need to leave Eileen by herself, but don't worry, we'll come back for her. Back at the crime scene, we can find Cynthia's commuter ticket along with the train handle at the exact spot of her murder. Using the train handle, we can move a section of train cars within the depths, revealing a never-before-seen doorway. This is how we'll escape the subway, but we need to get Eileen as well. This involves a lengthy and tedious amount of backtracking, along with opening the turnstiles with Cynthia's ticket, but when you're finally finished, you'll find yourself back inside the foggy stairwell that eventually spits out into the forest level. I was not joking when I said we would be backtracking through every single level we've already played. And to make things even worse, Walter Sullivan is now chasing us through every level.
Help me. Him! He's coming in!
As for progressing to this level, we'll need to construct a charred doll body in the ruins of the burned down orphanage. But before we do that, there's an interesting interaction near the lake. We can find Kid Walter again, but for the first time ever, we can actually speak to him.
Are you Walter Sullivan?
That's what everybody calls me, but I don't really have a name. Or a home either.
We learn that Walter has been doing everything that he's been doing because he's been brainwashed by the orphanage to believe that his mom is in room 302, aka Henry's apartment. We know that's false, but Kid Walter doesn't. His delusion is genuinely heartbreaking.
But soon I'll get to see my mom.
Do you know where she is now?
Yeah, of course. Right where I was born. Lots of people tried to stop me, but it's fine now. It says in the scriptures that I'll be with her. I gotta hurry. Mom's waiting.
It's also here we learn that Eileen can read the cryptic stones Henry couldn't when we were here the first time around. These stones give crucial information that help piece together a motive for why Walter is doing what he's doing. It's through these stones we get an explicit name drop to something called the 21 Sacraments, which is very important.
If I can do a good job reading the 21 Sacraments for the descent of the Holy Mother, I can meet my mother.
And we even learned that Dahlia from Silent Hill 1 used to visit Walter in the orphanage. Whenever Walter talks about the quote-unquote important lady, he's referring to Dahlia Gillespie. Before leaving, we grab a crested medallion and begin our journey of finding those missing doll pieces. However, we're not alone. On top of Walter chasing us, we also have to deal with another familiar face. The flaming ghost of Jasper is here to haunt us. Which thematically makes sense given that his life tragically ended in a fire. But we don't have to deal with him for long. After whooping his ass because I refused to die to a man named Jasper, I decided to use the Sword of Obedience, permanently removing Jasper from any future levels. Now as for those doll pieces, you'll need to find this somewhat hidden torch laying in the corner of a cemetery. Using this, you can light up wells where you can reach in and find each individual part scattered across the entire level. Placing them on the wheelchair doll results in us finding a secret underground altar which explains more details on the 21 Sacraments, the cult ritual Walter is trying to perform. Long story short, Walter had to collect the blood of 10 sinners, which was the first 10 victims. Afterwards, he needed to release himself from flesh, resulting in him being the 11th victim. After many years and some black magic fuckery, he somehow came back to life and continued his murder spree, starting with Cynthia and his last being Richard Braintree so far. Now all he needs to do is spill the blood of the Mother Reborn and the Receiver of Wisdom, which happens to be Eileen and Henry respectively. Reading this actually explains why the room has suddenly turned hostile. In the beginning of the game, the room itself heals Henry because Walter needs you alive, while also preserving his special place, which is room 302. He can't just outright kill you because the 21 Sacraments require specific sacrifices in a very specific order. It's why in the apartment level he was just chilling on the steps. It wasn't our time yet, but he was slowly preparing to kill us by offering the cursed doll. Now that Walter is ready to sacrifice us, the room no longer heals you, and the hauntings are a clever way to weaken the player and bring them into the domain where Walter can finally end Henry. But it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen. So using the crust medallion we found near Kid Walter, we can unlock a door bringing us back to the nexus point between Walter's worlds, although it's slowly corrupting, with its visibility becoming darker and bizarre imagery appearing in the outskirts. At the bottom, we find ourselves back in the water prison, but we descend an elevator from the sky that makes zero sense whatsoever. Although it really doesn't have to make sense because not only is it cool, but remember, we are in Walter's dream world. Before starting the water prison, I made a quick pit stop in the apartment and witnessed one of the coolest hauntings that can happen in the game. And that's actually the bloody peephole. Looking through it, you can find a ghost of Henry knocking on the front door. Imagine seeing your own dead body puppeteered as a ghost, knowing that if you don't succeed, that's gonna be your future in Walter's dream world. That thought alone makes this the best haunting in the game in my opinion. It sounds like a creepypasta you would lie about on an online forum, but no, it's a real thing that can happen in the game, and I think that's so freaking cool. Now back in the water prison, as soon as you step out of the elevator shaft, it's on site, as Walter is legit waiting for you here with murderous intent. As for making our way through this level, we need to head back behind the kitchen where Andrew DeSalvo was brutally slain. Within, we can find a prison t-shirt that, when brought back to our apartment and soaked in the bloodstained bathtub, reveals a hidden message. It basically tells us to beat the level, we'll need to use the Sword of Obedience on Andrew DeSalvo and steal his key. Thankfully, another sword can be found on the first level of the prison. With the sword in hand, we make our way towards the basement to be confronted by Andrew himself. Personally, I think this is the second worst boss in the game. And yes, I do consider this a genuine boss battle as you have to beat him to progress the game, unlike the other ghosts. Now, if you have the silver bullet, it's really easy to take him out. But if you missed it like I did on my first playthrough, this fight is actually hell. Unless you've got a Saint Medallion, taking him down using melee is pretty frustrating. He floats way too damn high in this sloped arena to hit him, and he's constantly flying away from you. It legit ended up taking me 60 handgun bullets to stun him, and only then could I finally stab his big back ass with the Sword of Obedience. Upon doing so, we instantly receive the water prison generator room key, which unlocks a door at the very bottom of the basement, a place we didn't visit earlier because, well, there wasn't a reason to. At that point, there was just a comically large door that made zero sense being there, but now the door is normal size, but it's being guarded by every twin victim known to man. This is where that stun gun from earlier really shines because it's an instant knockdown. I really can't think of a better weapon for this situation. Past the door, we find ourselves in the Nexus world, which is slowly becoming even more warped and distorted, with our next area being the building world again. Now this level is interesting in theory, but a little annoying in execution, because there are a ton of convoluted puzzles to solve that kind of feel contrived to pad out the runtime. Basically, you have to find objects from Walter's past and recreate memories scattered around the level. This ranges from lighting birthday candles and putting volleyballs in a bin to placing a stuffed cat in a crate and moving a pool ball onto a table. On top of that, you've got to deal with the ghost of Richard Braintree, who can actually teleport. And unlike the other ghosts that float around like sloppy wet hot dogs, Richard actually walks, making him even more of a surprise threat. He even has very jittery and contorted movement due to him dying by electricity. As for standout moments on this repeat level, we get an interaction between Walter and Kid Walter, which tells us these two have not been on the same page.
I'm going to see my mom. Stay out of my way. Who are you, anyway?
My name's Walter. Walter Sullivan. It's time to complete the 21 sacraments.
Which results in adult Walter literally kidnapping himself.
Well, let's go and see Mother.
Let me go, that hurts.
Damn.
There's also another appearance of Cynthia since we didn't exercise her back in the subway level, a room of nothing but wheelchair enemies running into each other. But the coolest thing is something you could easily miss if you rush to this level. Outside the pet shop where you place the stuffed cat, you can read a news article about a brutal attack. Around 8:30 p.m., a man with a submachine gun massacred the shop owner and every pet inside, then removed the owner's heart and carved a string of numbers into his back. This is a dead giveaway that Walter Sullivan was behind it, but what's really fascinating is what happens after you put the article down. Without any notice, a hail of bullets can be heard behind you in rapid succession for roughly 20 seconds. And should you go back inside, the whole place is flipped upside down with blood, bullet holes, and police tape everywhere. It's such a cool moment, but it's a shame something like this only happens once in the entire game, and it happens so late as well. But eventually you'll find yourself back in that ridiculously long stairwell again, but instead of going up towards Richard's apartment, we are now heading down. Thankfully there isn't a ghost chasing you all the way down like last time, but that's because there's something far worse that lies ahead. Beyond the gray door, you would expect to enter the Nexus world again, but instead we encounter our first major boss of the game. This boss is called the One Truth, which, don't get me wrong, is a badass name, but damn, this has to be the most annoying boss I've fought in the Silent Hill quadrilogy. And I do mean that. I would rather fight Flying Mary without ammo than to deal with this awful boss. This spawn of Satan is what happens when you take the worst enemy in this game, the unkillable wallmen from the escalators, but made them 10 times larger and far more dangerous. To beat this boss, you have to randomly hit each of the wallmen until you find the right one, which ends up dealing damage to all of them. It's simple on paper, but with hitboxes the size of Africa, you might die before you even find the right one. And even if you don't die, it's a good chance Eileen is going to get really messed up here. Which is a big deal because that can drastically change the ending you're trying to get. But should you succeed, a locked door in the back of the arena finally opens up, revealing the Nexus world we've come accustomed to, but it feels off. It's practically pitch black with an eerie stillness as almost all the objects in the cages have disappeared, except for this baby who's tweaking out at the very bottom. Down here at the core of the Nexus, we find room 302 again, which makes sense because we are in the deepest part of Walter's psyche. It's the one thing he's completely obsessed with, but this apartment isn't exactly ours despite sharing the same numbers. Within, we find it's completely monochromatic, with furniture that doesn't represent anything Henry currently owns. And that's because it's not Henry's room, it's actually Joseph Schreiber's, the previous tenant before Henry, which in a little bit of a plot twist, the opening section of the game, where the entire apartment is covered in blood and rust, wasn't Henry's perspective, but Henry seeing the past experiences of Joseph Schreiber. That's why in that section you can find Henry's photo on the wall, which Joseph doesn't recognize, and there's even a photo that blatantly shows you the 21 Sacraments. But if you check out the bedroom, you'll find the iconic red typewriter that belonged to Joseph, which is really cool because he's the one who's been leaving all the red paper notes we've been finding throughout the entire game. And after discovering this, he finally talks to us in person.
It's him.
You've done well to make it this far.
Which, what the fuck? That's a half-baked model if I've ever seen one. Bro's mouth doesn't even move.
Walter Sullivan.
But what the hell?
No amount of lore explanations or copium can tell me this was not a rushed section of the game. But regardless, our little naked blender baby here serves a very important role in the story. It's at this point Joseph recaps everything that has happened to us so far, but also tells us our final task. We have to kill Walter, because no amount of talk no jutsu can save a person like him. And thankfully, Joseph has found the location of his real body.
It must be nearby. You must kill her.
To find it, we'll need to use a brand new tool called the Pickaxe of Hope, which only manifested itself after talking with Joseph, and is actually the key item we need to reach the true Walter. Taking this back to our original apartment, we can find that ghosts are now literally coming out of the walls. Now, using that pickaxe on the same spot within our current day apartment reveals a sinister secret. Walter Sullivan has been inside our apartment the entire time. But this isn't surprising to me because there were a ton of subtle and not so subtle hints throughout the entire game telling us that Walter was in here. The first one is something that I alluded to in the beginning of the game. Our front door was chained from the inside, and Walter literally left a note on the inside saying don't go out. It would be physically impossible for him to do this without remaining in the room. I think if the note wasn't signed by Walter, this twist would have hit a lot harder. But there's more. When exploring the other rooms in the apartment world, every apartment was way bigger than Henry's, which made me believe there had to be another area of his apartment we were missing. This is also hinted at if you read a note called the Superintendent's Diary. In this one, Frank Sunderland talks about seeing Walter 10 years ago break into room 302 with a tool, bag of blood, and a bowl to never be seen again. But shortly after, neighbors complained that they heard strange noises coming from the supposedly empty room 302. But the most subtle hint is a specific haunting where Walter literally appears on a photo in Henry's bedroom on the wall where his actual body is located. The developers were just rubbing it in our faces the entire time, which is really funny to think about. But regardless, this has been behind our walls the entire time. Like if I dug a hole inside my apartment wall and found an entire room full of dead bodies, I would be flipping my shit, bruh. But reaching inside Walter's coat pocket, we can find the keys of liberation. And this right here is major because we can finally unlock the chains that have held us captive since the very beginning, which in theory should guarantee our freedom, but remember, this is a Silent Hill game. Walking out of room 302, you realize Walter's corruption has made its way into the real world, making this the final repeat level. Although I don't mind backtracking through areas when there's been a substantial change to the environment, making it feel somewhat fresh again. It's probably why this is the only repeat level I don't hate.
No way. Not here too.
Eileen?
Leaving room 302, you'll need to snake your way through your neighbor's apartments where you'll come across any ghosts you didn't exorcise earlier in the game. This is where I finally got revenge on the ghost of Cynthia, and even did the same to Richard Braintree for good measure. Now, there's a lot of cool shenanigans that happen on this level that didn't before. My favorite has to be inside room 204. Adult Walter has been a persistent threat on every level. Get down, Mr. President! But within this room, there's a section where he's graded off from you, similar to how Pyramid Head was introduced in Silent Hill 2. Definitely a little nod to a very iconic moment, which is cool to see. You can also finally see the inside of Eileen's apartment, but oddly enough, you can't enter her bedroom, or any room for the matter, just the living room. I think it would have been really neat if you could enter her bedroom and see the peephole connecting Henry and Eileen's apartments from her perspective. But the standout feature of this level is a depressing one. Once you reach the first floor, the music of this level changes from eerie to just downright gloomy. Kid Walter can be heard begging to find his dad, which plays into what's required to progress the level. Now this gets really annoying really fast because this shit kept infinitely looping in my game. But small details aside, the goal here is to break a set of 6 chains on Frank Sunderland's door so we can retrieve the stinky umbilical cord from his living room. To do this, we need to find hanging bodies of Walter Sullivan's dad that when interacted with shows us how much Walter's parents didn't want or love him.
Oh, shut the hell up! You can't blame it all on me. I told you we shouldn't have a baby, didn't I? Anyway, let's get out of here. I can't stand it anymore. If that super hears him, we're in trouble. There's something about that guy. I just don't like the look of him. Little crybaby. Hurry up. Get back.
After listening to all the memories, you can head to the first floor lobby to find Eileen grasping at Kid Walter's notebook.
Eileen?
It's terrible. That poor little boy.
away! Right after he was born! Poor thing. He really thinks that room 302 is his mother. I've gotta help him.
However, this cutscene will be different for each player depending on how possessed Eileen is. I did a really good job of protecting Eileen, so mine was fairly normal, but if she's very possessed, this can happen.
Daddy? Where are you? Where'd you go? Mommy? Mommy? Why won't you wake up? Henry? My head. Mommy? Henry? That boy. I have to help him.
As we head back to Frank Sunderland's room, we can now enter it and find the umbilical cord. But the moment Henry touches it, his mind is flooded with intense and vivid images of Walter's trauma. During this moment, Eileen decides to track down Walter with the goal of saving him, which explains why she had such a deep and emotional reaction moments prior when reading his old sketchbook. This is another cutscene that changes depending on Eileen's possession level, but to my understanding, this is part of Walter's magical powers, guiding her towards fulfilling her role as the mother within the 21 Sacraments. She's practically under a spell, so it's up to us to break it and finally put all of this to rest.
I'm going back, Henry. To the room where he is. We're the only ones. The only ones that can stop him.
My head.
Mommy? Why did you leave me? I'm scared. I'm so scared. It's dark. I'm so Mommy? Are you asleep? Mommy? I'll wake you up. I will.
After taking the umbilical cord back to room 302, we immediately notice something strange. Walter's body is missing, and in its place is a black hole that feels like it's connected to another dimension. Taking the plunge, we find ourselves in this oddly calming red room with Henry curled up in the fetal position. The imagery here is pretty straightforward, considering Walter's obsession with his mother, but I love how bizarre it feels with the red hazy fog and what looks like Walter's victims lining the walls. And just like in Silent Hill 3, we're forced to jump down a massive hole to reach the final boss. Within, we can find a spinning contraption that looks like a biblically accurate angel rising from a pool of blood, along with a giant flesh monster that roars out at us. We can also find Eileen atop a set of stairs that looks like some kind of sacrificial altar. I love the subtle personality change here within Henry. The entire game he's been very meekish and aloof about everything happening around him, but here, he's different. He's him. His eyes are focused, intense, and determined, showcasing a level of confidence we haven't seen from him before. He has something worth protecting, which is Eileen, and he's determined to stop Walter's bullshit once and for all. This right here is character growth, and we love to see it. Suddenly, we hear the pleas of kid Walter begging for his mother. Something adult Walter assures him will be all okay, because all Walter has to do now is sacrifice us, thus beginning the final battle.
Hey there, little Walter. Just a little longer now.
Henry, you're it. The last of the 21 sacraments. The final sign. The receiver of wisdom.
Now, for a final boss within a Silent Hill game, there's actually a few unique mechanics at play here. The first one involves Eileen, as her life is on the line. Thanks to Walter's magic, she's forced to march towards her death, and if she reaches that pool of blood before you can take him down, it's so Jover. Like, you won't lose the fight outright, but you will lose Eileen because she will actually die here, which is one of the major factors deciding which ending you will get. As for how fast or slow she gets there, depends entirely on how you treated her during the second half of the game. If she has little to no possession, then you'll probably be fine, but if it's high, good luck, buddy. She'll be doing the Heaven's Gate speedrun. Yeah, Eileen just got blended, bro. It's pretty gruesome. As for saving Eileen and defeating Walter, we need to use that umbilical cord on the flesh creature found in the middle of the arena. Just like how it did to Henry earlier, it floods Walter's psyche with painful memories of his past, giving us the opportunity to strike. We can do so by retrieving 8 spears scattered throughout the arena and then thrusting them into the creature. This accomplishes two things. It not only harms the flesh monster directly, but also weakens the once invincible ghost Walter, who is actively pursuing us the entire fight. Once all 8 spears have been placed into the torso of the beast, this allows us to finally do permanent damage to Walter Sullivan, turning this into a honest-to-God showdown with him. My gun versus his gun, and at this point, I had saved Richard's revolver and every bullet I could find just for this motherfucker. And after eating 30 bullets straight to the face, Walter is no more. After being tormented by Walter the entire game, we finally won. And in Walter's last breath, he calls out for his mom. With Walter out of the picture, the dream world he created is now dissolving. This also means the manifestation of Kid Walter will cease to exist, and we can see that.
Let me in! Mom!
And for the first time ever, Henry Townsend is able to walk outside and get a taste of fresh air. It's such a simple thing that people normally take for granted, but in this context, it means everything to Henry, after all the shit he just experienced. And you know the first thing Henry does with his newfound freedom? He visits his little Pookie Bear Eileen in the hospital with flowers in hand.
Thanks.
Which to me is just so damn sweet. Now this is one of the 4 endings you can get in the game. This one is called Escape and probably the best ending you can get. Eileen and Henry win against Walter and cleanse the apartment. However, it's weird that we saved the apartment, but Eileen still wants to leave.
Guess we'll have to find a new place to live, huh?
But I say that because in the second ending, called the Mother ending, Henry and Eileen win, but the apartment is still haunted. Which is weird because during this ending, Eileen says she wants to go back despite knowing the apartment is still messed up.
Well, I guess I can go back to South Ashfield Heights now.
You would think these two things would be the other way around, like if the apartment was clean, then we go back. If it's not, we go find somewhere else to live, but what do I know? As for the two final endings, they're not so happy. The third is Eileen's death. If you allow Eileen to get possessed enough during your playthrough, it becomes virtually impossible to save her without hacking the game. And don't tell me you can just save her by using a holy candle before the boss fight, that shit is a myth. This results in Henry winning against Walter, but at the cost of Eileen.
And now the news. Yesterday in Ashfield and the woods near Silent Hill, the bodies of 5 men and women were discovered. The police reported that all the murders appeared to be the work of the same perpetrator. They are continuing their investigation. 4 of the victims were found dead at the scene, and the 5th victim, a Miss Eileen Galvin, was transported to St. Jerome's Hospital, where she died a short time later. Police say that Miss Galvin's injuries matched exactly those of the other victims.
Eileen.
The fourth and final ending is definitely the worst one you could get. This is the 21 Sacrament ending. In this one, despite Henry winning the battle, he still lost the war as Walter succeeds in his plan. You straight up witness the death of Henry.
Ah! My head!
Before panning back to the apartment where Kid Walter finally gets to see and keep his mother, which he delusionally believes is the apartment itself.
Mom, I'm home. I won't let anyone get in my way. Gonna stay with you forever.
Afterwards, there's a radio broadcast confirming Henry and Eileen's death.
The woman was immediately rushed to St. Jerome's Hospital, but died a short time later of her injuries. She has been identified as a Miss Eileen Galvin of Ashfield. The last body discovered was found in room 302 of the South Ashfield Heights apartments. It is believed to be that of its occupant, Henry Townsend. The body was reportedly disfigured beyond recognition, making identification impossible.
While the entire time, the camera is focused on a dejected and defeated Walter Sullivan. While I can't confirm this anywhere, it's my interpretation that adult Walter is so depressed because he realizes in this moment that the 21 Sacraments was a complete lie. If you read all the stones back in the Forrest World, you would know the ritual was never going to bring back his mother, but summon a god for the cult.
October 16. Some important people came today. One of them was a lady named Dahlia. If I can do a good job reading the 21 Sacraments for the descent of the Holy Mother, I can meet my mother. The important lady told me that, but tomorrow I'm going to the round cell again.
Walter's entire human existence was legit only a backup plan if Alessa didn't work out in birthing God. Him shedding his literal humanity and spilling all the blood in his hands was for nothing. That's a hard fucking pill to swallow even for someone like Walter Sullivan. And the cherry on top is that Walter doesn't feel like a generic villain, but a truly lost man trying to desperately claw back the one thing he wanted most, his mother. And you know, I hate to say it, but despite everything that Walter did, it's hard not to feel a little weird about him. Because despite being evil through and through, I mean, the man literally cut someone's heart out. There's a small part of me that feels a little bad for him because it's so depressing to know that if he was just born with different parents, or the cult just didn't abduct him, he probably would have turned out like a normal guy similar to Henry. That's not how you write an antagonist. That's how you write one of the best antagonists out of all the Silent Hill games. But yeah, that's Silent Hill 4, and while it's not a bad game by any means, every time I finish playing, I'm just left feeling extremely frustrated. And when I really think about why, there's this undeniable potential buried underneath all the tedious and repetitive sections that leaves me wanting more of what could have been. There's a lot of great things about Silent Hill 4, but most people won't see it because it's muddied by questionable game design. From endless backtracking, reused areas, mediocre sound design, empty spaces, a lack of meaningful or interesting puzzles, and just an overall experience that feels like pulling teeth to play, this is just a handful of the many gripes I and many other players have with this game. But it's for those said reasons, I think this game should get a remake. And lucky for us, we live in a timeline where that might actually be possible. If the Silent Hill 2 remake is well received, believe that can seriously pave the way to see a Silent Hill 1, 3, and 4 remake eventually. And I don't know about you, but I'd love to see that happen.
By the way, personal shoutouts to Charles, Angel, Outback, and Ridley. Thank you so much, guys.